Driving Diary Episode 1. Currently at a rest stop. Driving up to Troy for an appointment. Currently, where we are with the project is as follows. We have gone through the process of demolishing the ground floor of the main building, and I hired a clean out crew to come and remove all of the trash that had been left over by the last owner in the carriage house and in the ground floor, clearing everything out. We had some conversations, great conversations with the architect about the concept for the project, and where we have landed so far is that we are going to be executing the idea of sort of like a pocket neighborhood. The idea behind the pocket neighborhood is that we are going to be creating 12 one-bedroom apartments as part of this project. And that will consist of a carriage house that has 4 one-bedroom apartments, and there's also a front building that's going to have a one-bedroom apartments and a store. Now, as we were exploring building out this project, we realized that while it isn't a historic district, there is a courtyard that is not visible from the street where we may be able to do a whole bunch of additions to the building that are not visible from the street, and therefore very likely not to be subject to historical approval, which is kind of great because it means that we can use more contemporary materials. We don't have to match everything historical because it's facing the back. So that's where that has landed us. And now, as part of that, right, the fact that we are going ahead and adding so many more units to the structure means that the utility load on the building is going to be significantly higher, right? There's going to be a lot more water consumption. There's going to be much more sewer because there's much more water consumption, and there's going to be much higher demand for electrical for a couple of reasons. One, of course, is the fact that we're increasing the number of apartments from 3 to 12, and also the fact that as part of this project, the objective is to make everything electric, both heat, hot water, etc., just for the fact that, you know, this way there's less to manage, less to deal with in terms of the gas, in terms of the gas pipes and all kinds of things like that. And then beyond that, it's the fact that it makes it easy to like set up a single meter for each tenant. They can pay their own heat, their own water heating. They can pay all the other, you know, energy consumptive needs, and it makes it a lot easier than managing the gas line. So as part of the setup, I already had the utility come in, and they removed the gas meters for, you know, all but the one unit that is currently occupied. They removed all of the electrical meters for all of the units except the one that's currently occupied and the commercial space. And so that's really because, you know, the building is very poorly insulated. The water is coming up to the second floor unit through the ground floor, and as part of the demolition and, you know, trying to, you know, reduce the costs of maintaining a heated space, right? The idea is now those water pipes that are feeding to the second floor going in through the first floor could freeze. And so in order to avoid that, the idea is keep the power on, and instead of heating the entire space, what we're going to do is we're going to put some heating strips that are going to be used to keep the water feeds up to the second floor warm and to prevent the lines from freezing. And that's pretty much it. And then everything else in the space doesn't need to be heated because the only downside is that. So now that we, you know, have established that the space is empty and, you know, what we're going to do and the number of utilities, etc., one of the things we know is like we need to upgrade the electrical main for the building, we need to upgrade the sewer main for the building, and we need to upgrade the water main for the building. We had one meeting so far with a plumber who came in and made a good recommendation of moving the sewer line to the center line of the property to avoid extra digging, which was good. But he recommended a much more invasive remediation than necessary. A second plumber came in a couple of days ago, had a meeting with the architect. That plumber agreed with moving the sewer main to the center line, but said that, hey, we could just abandon the old one and bury the new one much less deeply in the ground. And so that seems like a much more cost-effective solution. And so today, going up to meet with yet a third sewer maintenance replacement plumber to get the third set of eyes on it, right? And the idea here is that, getting 3 sets of eyes from 3 different bidders, you wind up finding out a lot and learning a lot, because sometimes if you go to the first person and you spec the job and you spec it incorrectly, there might be a better or smarter way, right? That vendor may take that because if you want to spend twice as much to do something a particular way, some vendors won't tell you no. So that's that. And so we're currently at the stage where we need to figure out exactly what's going to happen, because we need to do all of the utility mains, because as we start the renovation, those are going to be running under the existing structures, and we don't ever want to go back after something is finished and completed to have to replace or cut something open and then redo the work. That's just very wasteful. So right now it's a lot of pre-planning. So along those lines, we've also engaged with an engineer, an electrical engineer, right, to help us understand what the load capacity or the load needs of the building are going to be once we have the new setup, and then what kind of upgrades we are going to need in terms of the main utility, the number of meters, the switches, etc. So that first set of engagements has happened. That person is more of an engineer, meaning they're helping us understand what the full scope of the job really needs to be, so that when we bring on the actual construction electrical vendors, they will work with me and using the spec that was created by the electrical engineer to build out what is necessary. And so that's where things are along those lines. What else do we have? So in terms of the architect, we've had a bunch of great discussions with the architect, iterating through different versions of our design. Keep in mind that the front of the building is historic, so really nothing is changing there. It's staying identical. But in the back of the building, there's a number of places where, a 100-year-old building or 200-year-old building with a 100-year-old renovation needs some significant remediation. So we've been talking about, what the setup of the courtyard will be and how to make it sort of a cozy place, which would be a real asset when marketing the property, because not only will people have outdoor space, there'll be a courtyard space where they can actually host people outdoors and gather as a small community and interact, which I think is actually a very important part of this whole project, which is to make a unique product that people will really enjoy, that it is more than just a box to live in, but is, hey, there's a nice box to live in, but it's in a nice box, so a historic building. It has outdoor space, right? It has privacy, it has access, it has walkability. So all of these things, right, create a very different type of a package for a tenant that's looking for a high-end product. And so in terms of those discussions, we have sort of been iterating on what the color on the back should be. It started out with the architect suggesting that we use a vertical wood cladding and paint it to get a hint of color. Actually, initially they suggested wood. I did not like that idea simply because as wood ages, it oxidizes and it grays, and my concern was that, you know, the entire space would be bounded by, you know, very tall gray walls, which would be, you know, unappealing and uninviting. And so as a first iteration, the architect came back with the idea of actually painting the wood cladding, which I thought, while, you know, solved the issue of, you know, the look and feel, which would make it more inviting and, you know, make it so that in the long term, the feel of the place does not change or fade over time. It will require a lot of long-term maintenance, i.e. every, you know, 7 to 10 years going out and probably putting a fresh coat of paint on this. Given that it's a pretty sizable, you know, wall of the building, that is 5 stories high, you know, having to paint that, you know, once every 7 to 10 years seems like, you know, taking on a very significant liability. So as part of our discussions and our iterations, we started to talk about the metal siding, and we started to talk about things which are, you know, more durable, i.e. metal versus wood. And then also, you know, if that metal is powder coated or is a quality material, right, it essentially doesn't really change color for decades, which solves for the whole painting issue. And so, you know, we've sort of been iterating around and landed on a concept. We've also been discussing a great deal the treatment of what's going to happen in the carriage house and how the carriage house is going to interface with the alley behind it. How are you going to exit? How are you going to enter? How do you make it comfortable for the tenants to come in and out, etc.? And so that's kind of the status, I think, of where things are currently with the architect. In terms of moving forward, the plan is in March, there's a first meeting with historical to get approval for everything, run the crazy ideas we have by them in terms of all the things we want to do. Hopefully, you know, we'll have some back and forths and get some sign-offs on, you know, what we want to do. We've had some initial discussions already with historical and planning to give them some ideas, because we didn't want to go into the first discussion with them having no idea of what we plan on doing. So the first discussion was really kind of talking about the overall idea, which was raising the roof, enlarging the building, etc., finishing the carriage house, so that when we come for a second meeting, it's really more about the design as opposed to some of the larger issues, because those issues had been addressed and discussed previously. You know, the main you know, strategic objective here is to not go too far and get them no. So the idea was, hey, let's talk about what we want to do. One of the main things we wanted to get clearance for was raising the roof of the building and a couple of other things. So we raised those issues with the folks at planning. They seem to be okay with it. Clearly, there's always, you know, what does it actually look like in the end? But conceptually, once they were in, it was great, because now we have to make sure that the look and feel of what we do actually matches aesthetically and makes them comfortable. And so that's really sort of this second phase. And once we pass the second phase, which is with the historical, and we get approval from them, then we have to go and get the actual work permit as it relates to, you know, giving us the permission to, you know, start doing the work on the building. Now, an interesting note here, right? On this project, I will essentially be acting as my own GC or general contractor. In the state of New York, in order to be a general contractor, you need to have workman's comp insurance, and you need to have liability insurance. Now, because I'm not providing a service to anybody in the community and I'm not selling it, I'm technically not a general contractor. I am a homeowner or property owner, right, doing work on my own property. And so what that means is two things. One, I have an exemption from workman's comp. It means that I don't have to have the workman's comp insurance as other general contractors do. There is a caveat, though. It means that I can't hire people directly. Every person that I hire has to have their own workman's comp insurance. That means they're probably working for a company, right? Or even themselves, but it's their own company. And, you know, once that is in place, and I select my vendors that way, then I avoid the cost of workman's comp. The other issue is the issue of liability insurance. What if somebody gets hurt, not necessarily a worker, on the site during construction? What if a construction worker drops an object from the roof and hurts somebody on the sidewalk, etc.? So for that, there's liability insurance. The main difference is that when you do a construction project, right, most liability insurance does not cover those type of large-scale projects. So I'll be acquiring a policy that includes both property and liability, which it always does, but in this case the liability covers definitively the on-site construction. And so that what that means is that, you know, I will satisfy the state's requirements of having the liability insurance, and I will satisfy the state requirements because I should be able to fulfill the requirements of a workman's comp waiver. And so the next step of the application process after the workman's comp waiver and after all that is to actually pull the permit. We're hoping that the permit gets pulled and we can actually start working, you know, by the end of April. That work permit is for a particular class of work. So some work has started on the building. So we did some demolition. How did we do demolition? Well, we got a demolition permit. So that's one thing that you can always keep in mind, that there are ways to progress the project forward and keep things moving along, even if there are sort of administrative challenges along the way. So knowing how to break down your project is really critical to make that happen. Beyond the permit in April, etc., another bit of work that is getting done that doesn't require a permit is the window restoration. So in most municipalities, right, there is a definition for work that requires a permit. Usually that is not a repair. Usually that means you're moving plumbing, you're moving electrical, adding plumbing, adding electrical, you know, moving or adding walls. But if you're just fixing something that exists, you don't need a permit. So along those lines, we've already retained a vendor that does historic window restoration. That vendor specializes in that one specific service. We had come in and had done a walkthrough of the building with that vendor and two others. And again, getting the three vendors gave us a bunch of really good information from all three to help us both identify who the best vendor is and give us direction. Interestingly enough, the window vendor, the window restoration for the historic windows is going to be about $30,000. One vendor that came was very interested, drove 2.5 hours to the project only to inform me after the walkthrough that they were fully booked for all of 2025 and would be happy to take this project on if 2026 start date was acceptable. Clearly that was going to be an issue for me. So, you know, that was fine. So there were two other vendors that we had that had come and seen the job. One is the one that we had contracted with, which was around $30,000, and another one that came in much closer to $40,000. And the main difference is that the one that was more expensive was really just much farther away, and every time they would have to come to the job site and back, it would require a couple of hours of travel. And so it's not surprising that that vendor would charge significantly more, because the same work really requires a lot more overhead of travel, whereas the vendor that we selected is local. Interestingly, the vendor that we selected works with a lot of other historical properties and nonprofits in the area. We did a lot of homework, which was great. We came in and had some discussions with the folks. What we had spoken with the historical window restoration guys about as we were looking at the building, what was interesting was the one who couldn't actually do the work because they were too booked up was the most knowledgeable, and gave us a bunch of tidbits of information and to look for that would likely place the age of our building more likely to be around the 1820s original building date. Now, the interesting thing is, how did we reach this conclusion? Well, it started out that we went upstairs. Well, we came inside and looked at the store, because that's just happens to be where I was meeting folks before we went up. It was warm, and while we were in the store, what you can see is the underside of the floor for the floor above, which means you can see the underside of the boards. And what's interesting is that as you look at those boards, you can notice that where those boards lay across the joists in certain areas, there are places where you can see that the board was sort of gouged out to create a little bit of a recess in certain places. The historic window restoration that we were talking to at that moment, the guy had mentioned that happens because those are boards that had come off of a pre-standardized industrial wood mill, and so all the boards were slightly different thicknesses, and this was probably in the early 1800s, as late as the 1830s. And so as those boards were laid down across the joists, because they were of different heights, instead of planing down the board, right, what you would do is you would carve out the underside of the boards, right, to level them across the floor. And so that was one piece of evidence that seemed to indicate that was the age of the building. Another was when we went out to the second floor, we saw that there is a remnant of a fireplace. Well, not a remnant. There is a fireplace, which in the other floors clearly had existed at one point but had been removed. But when you look at the fireplace and the style of the fireplace and the style of the moldings around the doors, it's pretty evident, at least according to an expert, not me, that the architectural style is Georgian and not Victorian. Which is very interesting. King George was Victoria's father, so that predates that time, which was a very interesting find. After that, we had done some historical research, and the first record that we have, visual record image of that building, was from probably somewhere between 1900 and 1910. And so after that, we went through the process of meeting the three vendors, selecting a vendor that was fine. We engaged the vendor. The project of restoring the windows is probably going to take about a year. Each window is going to get removed. It's going to get dipped to remove all of the paint. Now, those paints are likely have lead paint on them, and there's also this material that is put around the windows to hold the glass in place, which likely also has lead. So a lot of that is going to get removed. All of the windows are going to get sanded down. Anywhere there is rot, they'll be repaired, etc. Now, I got a wonderful email from the window restoration vendor letting me know that after he stripped the first window, he found out that it was of a very high quality. Now, of course, most antique windows are of a very high quality, but windows like these, as he had stated, even in buildings from the Victorian period, or that had renovations for the Victorian period, generally had factory-made windows, meaning that they were mass-produced. Those windows are the standard, and a lot of times if you have those antique factory-produced windows, there are many companies that make replicas which are good enough, look very similar, and can be just swapped out with new windows that just happen to look historical. On our project, when we had gone and spoken to the historical preservation, they had noted that there were some very interesting features on our windows, which likely indicated that they were of a very high quality nature. And as we went through the process of stripping them, etc., with the historic window restoration expert, he had noted that these windows were not factory made, and that the main difference is that these windows are essentially master carpenter created with a mortise and tenon. There are no fasteners, there's no nails, there's no screws. It's held together with shims and friction. And moreover, these windows, because they were made by a very expert craftsmen, were also not made of a softwood. They were made of a hardwood. And at the moment, the window restoration expert isn't sure if it's oak or mahogany. But either way, right, windows that are 100 years old made of either of those are going to be made from an old growth of that species, which makes these windows tremendously durable and the wood incredibly unique and rare. And so that's the status of where we are with a window restoration. Other than that, we're making progress on moving the capitalization of the project forward. We're going to be doing close to 7,000 square feet or so, or 8,000 square feet. In all likelihood, that's going to be, $1.5 million project or so, maybe even more. We'll see how those numbers land. But right now, in terms of the status, we are going through the process of refinancing one of the other properties in our portfolio for two reasons. One is that property was on a commercial mortgage with a 7-year term that's coming due at the end of 2025 in November. So even though we're nowhere near November, we're going to need to do it in a few months. We have a significant amount of equity that we can leverage into the portfolio, and it seemed like the right time to start, because we don't necessarily need the money right now, but better safe than sorry, for one, and two, as it turns out, fortuitously, as we're going through the process, which will probably take another 60 days or so, we've been very fortunate that there have been some historical declines in market rates for 10 and 5-year treasuries. And why does that matter? Well, commercial mortgages are priced relative to 10 and 5-year treasuries. In terms of the mortgage that we have applied for, it's called a 5/5/30, and so unlike a 30-year fixed mortgage where you have a particular rate and that rate holds true for 30 years, commercial mortgages are slightly different. This particular mortgage gives you a fixed rate for 5 years. After 5 years, you have the option of renewing the loan for another 5 years. The reason at that moment in time, when you do the renewal, the rate for that renewal resets to whatever the market conditions are. So the rate could go up, the rate could go down. And then the last component of the type of loan is the 30, which is the 30-year amortization. So you're making payments as if it's going to take you 30 years to pay back the loan, but you're only doing the first 5 years of that loan, right? And then at the next, the reset will be again the first 5 years of that next 30-year loan. And so that's the type of loan, and its rates, because it's on these 5-year terms, its rates are tied to the 5-year treasury. So as the treasuries fluctuate, right, it creates price changes in the market as we perceive it as consumers of debt. And so we've gone through the process of speaking to a number of different capital sources, spoken via a mortgage broker to a local bank named Emigrant Bank, spoke through a contact on LinkedIn with Safra Bank, and a couple of other folks who are hard money lenders. A lot of it was just to sort of suss out the lay of the land and the feel to see where the rates are at. Initially, we got a rate through the broker from Emigrant of somewhere around 7.25%, which seemed, quite high. We had reached out to Safra Bank. Turns out I knew somebody in the underwriting, so we talked to their chief investment officer, who gave us a term sheet for 6.85, which was a significant difference of 40 basis points. And so, but having never worked with them and not really knowing that bank and not having a relationship, I figured, hey, if I could go back and my mortgage broker can, meet or beat this deal, I'd rather work through my broker. One, because he works with the bank that pays his fee, so I don't have to pay for it. That's one. And two, if I get the same rate, then I'm better off sticking with a bank that I'm more familiar with, driving business to a relationship that has been helpful to me, i.e. my mortgage broker, right? And for me, it's a better win-win than taking risk with a bank that I'm not too familiar with, I don't have a relationship with, and nobody in my network really has the kind of relationship with that bank that could be helpful to me, other than extending to me a term sheet. And so that was the process we went through to make the decisions around how we're going to raise the liquidity for the second phase. And that's pretty much the status of where the project is today. Not much is going to be happening in the near term until we have the permit. Actually, having said that, one of the things that we do need to do is there is a significant amount of damage to the masonry to the carriage house in the back. The downspout from the roof in the back was not connected to anything really. It was never really taken care of. It was quite neglected. So there's water pouring all over the masonry, freezing and thawing, and really causing a lot of damage. That's causing displacement of bricks, etc. Now, these can be considered repairs, especially if you can show the city that there may be a hazardous condition. They can generally give you a permit to make those repairs relatively quickly, right, for the sake of public safety. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to take advantage of that because, one, it's the right thing to do, but two, we're going to be able to sneak in a bunch of work ahead of our regular permit, but using a different kind of permit to accelerate the process. And so one of the things that I will be doing today is taking some pictures and evaluating the situation, contacting a mason to start talking about what that's going to take and going from there. The main challenge that we have to deal with when it comes to the carriage house wall is that we are slated to do a bunch of other work and change that facade in preparation for creating apartments. Now, it doesn't really make sense to repair that wall to its current condition if we're going to change it. So the idea is to get a little bit farther along in terms of what historical, may or may not accept. And once we have a good idea, sort of aim towards that as our goal, hoping that that design will be approved. Don't have too many concerns about that because our architect has done a lot of work with historical in the past, and has a reputation in town, and so I'm not concerned that he'll be able to get that approved, given that he has the feel for what's going to get through, and the fact that we've had those conversations. That said, as a business owner and somebody who is managing the risk, right, there is always the possibility that you're going to go ask for permission and somebody says no for some reason, and there are things that you're going to have to redo or compromise on. So in that case, that's definitely a possibility. But having said that, one of the things which makes Troy attractive is, Troy as a town, it has a bunch of investment currently in the town, but it has been neglected for very, very long. And the town, the people, the administration, are very, very focused on helping investors bring money into the community, rehabilitate some of these old buildings that are essentially disused. And so, for the most part, the reputation up in Troy is that the municipality is quite accommodating. That's not what happens, for example, in New York City. In New York City, it's quite the opposite. So, while we don't have an assurance of exactly, what we can or can't do, the reality is that the leniency and flexibility in the system is in our favor, and that's a good thing here. And so what we're going to try to do is, see if we can delay a couple of weeks in terms of when we kick off the actual repair of the masonry. Give us a little bit of time to, basically run down the clock a little bit on the historical planning stuff, and then pull the trigger and then redo that back wall to both repair it and in preparation for the next phase. And so I think in terms of, all the vendors that we're talking to now and everything, that's pretty much sums it up. There's a couple more things that are open items to pursue, including the National Grid Main Street Revitalization grants. There's also the NYSERDA energy efficiency grants, which are very much up in the air, which is kind of crazy because given the current administration and the situation with a lot of these cuts, if all of those programs were in place, it could mean a difference of about $250,000 in grants. And that would be a fantastic kick to the profitability of this deal, but it's not going to make or break this deal because this deal was a good deal. It was in our alley, up our alley, I guess you could say, when we first approached it, and all of these added tax benefits and energy efficiency benefits are all gravy on top of it, which is fine, but they are not the metrics by which we choose or don't choose to do a deal. And so that's pretty much it. It is the 28th of February on Friday. I am heading up to Troy. I will see you guys later.